My name is Michael Kelly. It's my honor to, got this on go? It's my honor to represent the director, Uwe Brandes, as the Master of Ceremonies for tonight's presentation. I'm also honored to have Bobby Lipnick, who serves as a co-instructor in the course that this larger lecture series is wrapped around. So welcome to the Georgetown's Urban and Regional Planning Program's Fall 2014 Public Lecture Series. We are this fall investigating planning practices associated with large, transformative investments in cities and their communities. Transformative urban investments are driving greater complexity in the stakeholder partnerships necessary to implement them. It's not uncommon for single urban development projects to have many dozens of public and private partners. Implementation timeframes can often span decades and even years, or not years. As investments are made and projects are implemented, the turnover of project planners, professionals, and organizations raises the importance of establishing durable governance. Long-term schedules expose projects to the uncertainty of new policies and regulations that did not exist at the onset of the project's conception. And yet, the inexorable growth of cities around the world creates the context of continuous incremental change. This process of imaging and re-imaging the future of urban communities continues by public, private, and nonprofit organizations. Well, welcome to tonight's dialogue. It's my honor to present to you my buddy and a remarkable guy, George Hawkins. George is the general manager of the District of Columbia's Water and Sewer Authority. He was named to this post in a unanimous vote September 3rd, 2009 by the board of directors. Has an operating budget of more than $1 billion, and it provides drinking water and wastewater collection for the entire city, over 630,000 residents these days, as well as the millions of people who work or visit the district. It also treats the wastewater for a population of about 1.6 million people in Montgomery and Prince George's counties in Maryland and Fairfax and Loudoun counties in Virginia. It also, and you'll hear in a second, it operates the world's largest advanced wastewater treatment plant at Blue Plains with a capacity of 370 million gallons per day. George Hawkins launched an ambitious agenda at DC Water that complements its vast 10-year program to improve the infrastructure. And again, you'll be hearing about the larger infrastructure investments. But in parallel to that, he's also looked at changing sort of the cultural dynamics of how water is used and treated by district employees, the residents at large. Well, I first met George prior to joining DC Water. He was I guess, the first DC's Department of the Environment director. You were the first, huh? And as such, it was a $110 million agency, over 300 employees, and it provided all the sort of environmental functions required for the district and for the area at large. Prior to joining the district, George was executive director of the New Jersey Future, a nonprofit organization which under his leadership came to be recognized as the state's foremost advocacy group monitoring smart growth. And he's had a variety of stints, including major senior positions at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, senior assistant regional counsel and special assistant to the regional administrator. He served Vice President Gore on the National Performance Review, and he's actually had programs with the throughout the EPA. He began his career practicing law for Boston firm Ropes & Gray, a member of the Bar of Massachusetts and the District of Columbia. He graduated summa cum laude from Princeton University and cum laude from Harvard Law School. And since 1999, George Hawkins has taught environmental law and policy for Princeton's Environmental Institute at Princeton University. So without further ado, let's welcome George Hawkins.
Hey everyone, it is a delight to be here today, and thank you for that kind introduction. I always am reminded whenever I hear parts of an introduction like that is that I cannot keep a job, because I have been in a lot of different positions over my career. On the other hand, that has given me a lot of different views on the issue I'm going to present. I do, by the way, I'm really delighted to be introduced by Michael. He's one of the best. So the fact that those of you who are students, not only is he very good at what he does, he's done it as well in a lot of different places. So he has a tremendous wealth of experience and knowledge. about how to do this, including in our fair city. So it's great I've known for all these years. What I'm going to try to do first, because I've got to get to the question of the day, which is how we finance what we do at DC Water and how these projects are done. I hope to convince you that DC Water is one of the coolest places ever, and that we have the coolest product ever, that we do some of the coolest work ever, even if you didn't think of that when you thought of a water or a sewer utility. By the way, we're always recruiting. I'm recruiting a lot of people now. Go online. If you're interested, we might hire you. And I think you really enjoy coming to join us at DC Water. But I want to make that case as to why it's such a linchpin issue for the, I view, the health and welfare of the entire planet. The first part of this, actually most of the whiteboard, I cannot do a class like this without drawing. I'm old-fashioned. It won't be the main part of it, but I'm going to teach, or at least explain, my entire Princeton class in 10 minutes. I wouldn't say that to my Princeton students because I want to know why I extended out to an entire semester. But it leads up to why I'm where I'm at, because it is what I learned about what I'm going to show you over maybe 10 minutes that is the reason that I'm standing before you and why I've committed my entire career to the job that I'm doing now. It's a very straight line that's unusual for someone in my background. I may be the only ex-environmental enforcement lawyer who runs a giant utility. That just is not typical. So here's where it is. I'm an environmental lawyer. Actually, I grew up in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I took a bus trip when I was in 4th grade, and when I came off of Cleveland Heights, this was the height of the baby boom. I was in a school with 2,000 kids. We took all these buses down to Cleveland and then down a second hill to the Flats, which is the area of Cleveland along the Cuyahoga River. It's the river that splits Cleveland into the east side and the west side, and it's one of the largest industrial areas in the world at the time. Cleveland was one of the largest industrial cities in the world. And what's hard to describe is the consequence of that achievement. I remember as a 4th grader getting off the bus, and the first thing that hit you was the air. It was so polluted, it was hard to describe, and so heavy. And I asked the bus driver, "What's that smell in here?" I remember him tapping me on the head. "My son, that is the sweet smell of success." That was what his comment was. I don't remember it as much, although I remember walking and looking into the Cuyahoga River, and you would look like a figure painting. I don't know if kids do that anymore. But the river was so polluted, and all of you have heard the story, but what you might not know is the Cuyahoga River didn't just ignite on fire once. It was on fire about a dozen times through the 60s. The last was about a week-long fire. Week-long, imagine that. Because they think it was a train was going across one of the main train tracks over the river, and a spark from the tire wheel went down into the river. And think of that, the river is so polluted that the pollution remediation technique is a match. But that was when I became an environmentalist on that day. And I lost it, unfortunately. For the longest time, my parents kept the letter I wrote to President Nixon. You know, in those old papers with all really wide lines and the big letters. But I was saying, you've got to clean up the air. It wasn't hard to tell. You didn't have to be environmental to get to that and realize there is something wrong with this picture. St. Clair Road is one of the roads down in Cleveland. You could not see from one side to the next block because the air pollutants were so heavy. Because that was the industrial heartland pumping out the consumer products that made the modern world after World War II. All the soldiers came home, they moved out to the suburbs, they only had washing machines and cars and everything else. And places like Cleveland built it. It was a bedrock of the country. And so the statutes that come in a blizzard after those events in Cuyahoga River, Love Canal, Times Beach, that whole, were fundamentally to solve that problem. So you have the Clean Water Act. It's actually the Clean Water Act are amendments to an existing statute called the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1956. We don't have to worry about knowing all that. But what's known as the Clean Water Act was an amendment to an existing statute. But it set up a system regulating the discharges from what's called point sources, and I know many of you probably know this very well, to waterways. That was the main thing that Clean Water Act did. There's a fascinating story behind it, which I won't get into, but there was a huge battle. It got vetoed at one point, and there was a whole battle between the House and the Senate, and it turned out that the compromise was to include both of what the House and the Senate wanted, which has come back to be very interesting as a consequence. But that was 1972. You had the Clean Air Act coming in, which was regulating all the pollutants coming out of the smokestack. You had a RCRA, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, is a statute that governs how chemicals are used from what's called cradle to grave on purpose. So this is the plant buying chemicals, how it's bought, where it's stored, how it's stored in the plant, how it's used when it's finished, how's it maintained. And then when all this stuff it was buried somewhere and was leaking out and there's a contamination, that's of course the Superfund law. CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, which was passed to clean up these old, by the way, before all this was NEPA, I won't go into that, but that was the first big statute in 1970, which is the statute that requires environmental impact statements. So these were the big statutes that were passed. And in my humble opinion, it is one of the great success stories of progressive government. Not Republican or Democrat. Progressive government in the sense there was a clear problem represented by Times Beach, Love Canal, Cuyahoga River, Hudson River, you name it. We're polluting our environment like crazy. We identified it as a problem as a society, decided we need a solution, and came up with a panoply of laws that have been remarkably successful. The Cuyahoga River, when they did a conservation study of it in the 1960s, had 10 fish. 10 fish total. That's all they found in their study. Today, there are 60 species of fish in the Cuyahoga River. Still not as clean as you'd want it to be, but the difference between 1972 and 2012, 40 years later, is unbelievable. And that's because the statute set up this system that mandated, this by the way, sorts of interesting questions, but the big issue about the Clean Water Act, same kind of question under the Clean Air Act, is up until 1972, what you had to do, if this was your plant discharging into the waterway right here, this is now looking down. So this is like a lake with rivers coming into it, so this is a bird's eye view looking down on this facility with up. So this is the water out here. This plant is now discharging to the water body. Is that you had to create a water quality standard here and then figure out your way backwards as to what ought to be the discharge from the pipe. That was in place since 1956. But of course, what you want from this pipe is then an extremely complicated scientific question by itself because of the thermodynamics of the water and how much contribution from this versus the other plants. What about the speed? What about weather? There's all sorts of things, the quantity, the flow through, there's all sorts of issues to figure out what number it ought to be. And the other big question is, well, what do you want to use this water for? Because the quality that you see from that pipe is going to depend on the quality that you want in the water body. And what you could do back in those days was define, we want this water body to be a commercial. It's not going to be drinking water supply. So we'll allow it to have more pollution in it because there's going to be lots of facilities around it. So the existing system for water quality standards was a terrible failure up to 1972. And what they said under the Clean Water Act actually came from something in 1899 called the Rivers and Harbors Act, which prohibited discharges to the harbors of the country. Boston Harbor, you would discharge into it. And it prohibited it no matter whether or not you could prove it was a problem to the harbor. Because what a defendant did here, if you tried to impose a requirement on them with a water quality standard in that old system, is they'd say, I'm not really harming the water body. Prove it. I'll have as many studies that show that my discharge doesn't harm the water. Well, what the Rivers and Harbor Act, 1899, says, we don't have to prove it. If we think it's a bad thing for you to put something into the harbors of the country, you just can't do it. And we don't have to prove that it's bad. That's what the Clean Water Act did. The National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, was created by the 1972 amendments called the Clean Water Act. It now established strict standards for what could come out of this pipe, regardless of what you could prove or not prove about the water quality of the receiving body. And it said, you must put in the best available technology next Thursday at 10 o'clock, or you will be fined $25,000 a day per violation. Incredibly successful. Weyerhaeuser, by the way, sued, because Weyerhaeuser had a paper plant in the upper Pacific Northwest that's discharged to the Pacific Ocean. And they said, you cannot prove that our discharge to the Pacific Ocean makes 1 whit of difference to a water body that big. When they lost. Because it wasn't asking the question from the water body backwards. It was asking what's there. Well, yeah, I divert myself. So for 20, 30 years, including my early history as a lawyer, first I was a lawyer representing companies like this. Much later, I started in 1988. By 1988, these were so complex, these statutes, that they now had to hire lawyers to help interpret them for them to do the right thing. They were called compliance lawyers. So I used to do visits all over to corporate clients, helping them figure out what the hell to do to stay in compliance with the law. They're very complicated. But the system had been incredibly successful. Doesn't mean there's not more to do. And here's what had occurred to me while I was there. I was working on an NPDES permit for a discharger to a river in Boston. I was working at Region 1 in Boston. And the problem was, if you we were trying to reduce copper, which in high numbers is a bad thing, like a lot of metals. But the problem was the natural level of copper in the water in the river was higher than the number we were going to impose on the permit. So the technology of using the best available standard was now getting better than natural conditions. And what we knew about the river is that the biggest risk to the river was no longer that plant. Because we've been ratcheting down the discharges from this discharge point so far that now that wasn't the big source anymore. Great success! But now it's getting really damn expensive to get any of the last little bits of pollutants out of this pipe. And it was no longer what was happening. So let's say you take this facility, plunk it down into this landscape. What we're continuing to do is looking at the discharge from here. And what we realized is that the real problem with this, the history of this water body, was the huge new subdivisions that were being built because of sprawl, each one of which was covering over natural land, creating more stormwater runoff, creating more metals, all petroleum, everything that comes with development. So all this development was going on all over the place, which was totally changing the hydrology of the system and having an incredible consequence to the environment. And we were still fighting over that 0.5 parts per billion of whether or not that should be in the discharge here. And I woke up. I must say I'm always a little bit late to the game, but when I get there, I go all in. When I realized that, well, who does this? This is where the action is. And the answer is not the feds. The feds have almost no say about these questions. It is a county or a local municipality or planning board meeting Thursday night at midnight when they decide what's going to happen. So I said, that was when I was working for Vice President Gore, and it was all about reinvention. You remember all? Man, you probably don't. No. But back in the Gore days, it was all about reinventing government. Figure out what the real problem is and focus on it. So I figured like I had to follow the conviction of the principal. Here I was trying to make this more efficient. I realized I'm doing the wrong stuff. If we really want to protect the environment of this ecosystem, we've got to get a handle on all that. And if that's being done in local planning board hearings, I have to be part of an organization that has an influence on local planning boards. So I left EPA. I'd gone from a private sector lawyer to a public sector lawyer for a variety of reasons. That was about 10 years worth. And I ran a watershed association in New Jersey. Figure if you want to do land use, go to the belly of the beast, which at the time was central New Jersey around the Turnpike and Route 1. It was nuts. There was growth going on willy-nilly everywhere. New Jersey is a beautiful state, but it has almost every problem before everybody else does. And they try things, and then you can learn from what to do and sometimes what not to do. And so we created at the Stony Brook Watershed, which is where I was working, all sorts of programs to try to limit sprawl. We were reasonably good at it. By the way, we used water. But here's the next, because when you build on all of this, in New Jersey, believe it or not, Maryland, Virginia, a lot of these developments are not sending their stuff to big sewer plants. They're on septics and well water. And when you're in septics and well water, you have to have a certain amount of space per each septic system, because essentially the ground is being the waste treatment plant along with the septic system, and you don't want it to contaminate the drinking water well that's not right next to it. So you need a certain amount of space. Nitrate dilution is a model you use, and we were proving that all these towns were overdeveloping, sprawling out on the landscape, causing permanent water quality problems on the numbers. It wasn't just because we didn't like it. We had science to back up what we were talking about. I did that for 7 years. I think I attended about 2,000 public meetings. I kid you not. Because in New Jersey, all these meetings are at night, because almost everybody who serves are volunteers. And you've got to stay to the end, or they beat you at midnight. Which was an investment I'll never forget, the battles and the wars and all the stories of doing land use in New Jersey for 7 years. But here's where I became convinced that what we were trying to do out here was to stop the sprawl. And you could win here, there, or other places. And Mike and I were talking about it because we both attended Princeton. I was in an organization around Princeton, so we had a fairly wealthy donor base, so we were pretty good at it. But there were communities around that weren't as wealthy as Princeton that couldn't do this. And if we stopped the sprawling development around Princeton, it would pop up in Bucks County in Pennsylvania across the Delaware where they didn't have a Stony Brook. So we weren't winning, we were displacing. If there was this push to build out this way, we were going to lose eventually, unless we could change the game. And that's when I became convinced. The next epiphany I had, again, late to the game, was instead of stopping everything out here, constant battle. You win one, 2 months later they come back. It's almost impossible to win. Let's revitalize the cities. It's not really the story of Washington, D.C., except for 10 years, 20 years ago, when the population of the city was going down. That was Newark, Trenton, Elizabeth, all the cities of the country just about. People were leaving the cities in droves and spreading out over the landscape, leaving these places depopulated, population dropping, rateable base dropping, harder to maintain schools. Ironically, all these jobs were being created out here, and the people who were here had a hard time getting to them. It was traffic, it's air quality, global warming because of all the energy that's used by this mess. Let's rebuild in cities. And that's when I became part of New Jersey Future, where our whole mantra was, let's rebuild New Jersey cities. You want to protect farmland? Build cities. You want to protect natural habitat? Build cities. You want to get jobs where people are? Let's rebuild cities. You want to use more public transportation? Let's build cities. Want to cut energy use per person? Let's rebuild cities. There's almost nothing you can't improve. Want to have people get to know each other, like a neighbor? Not have to drive their kids on a play date halfway across the community and spend their entire weekends to go. When I grew up in Cleveland Heights, I played football at the Y down the street, and I walked there. Why? Because I could. That was because it wasn't a city. Cleveland Heights was an inner-ring suburb, but everything was close. The church was down the street, the school was where you walked to it. It was so much less burdensome on parents for kids to live in that circumstance. That rather when you're here, and you go to school here, and your friend is over there, and you got a play date here, and you're on the dance team there. I mean, it's nuts. And you drive like crazy and live there. So, then we get to the question, which is where Adrian Fenty found me. He's the one who hired me to come run the Department of Environment. We were focusing on rebuilding cities. And the irony is that although cities do have all the infrastructure that hasn't been put out here yet, it's old. So the reason I left New Jersey to come here, other than the chance to work in Washington, D.C., is this question of how to rebuild a city's infrastructure to make it desirable so that we can reverse this trend of spreading out over the landscape like locusts and revitalize urban areas, bringing jobs and economic vitality to places that need it. So then you get back to the city and you end up back with this plant again. And here's what we find, is infrastructure is incredibly important and it's incredibly expensive. So even though it already exists, you go to Trenton or Newark or Washington and you want to rebuild, and yes, it's happened here. We're now 10, 20 years into a long, slow, gaining momentum regrowth of the city, but at first it wasn't easy at all. The median age, meaning half or older and half or younger, of a water main in Washington, D.C. is 79 years. The median age of a sewer main is older, and we don't know. We're guessing around 90 years. 90 years, median. We got water mains in this city, in operation, north of the White House, that were put in before the Civil War. So you come into the cities, you want growth to come, let's build here where you don't have to drive everywhere, let's have businesses be here, let's bring vitality back to the city, and you find what you think of as an asset, which is the existing infrastructure, here actually becomes a liability. It's so expensive. So the question of how to rebuild infrastructure, the reason I spent all this time on all this, and that's why I went from the Department of Environment that regulated DC water to actually joining DC water. Got to figure out how to handle this question in the, truly, again, in the belly of the beast, the enterprise responsible for it. And I'll give you a sense of why this is so hard. This is just a little schematic. Here's the streetscape with a curve on each end. Water mains are usually on one side or the other, not down the middle, and they're closer to the surface, maybe 5, 6 feet deep, sometimes deeper depending on their size. Sewer mains are much deeper, 10 to 20 feet, and are much bigger, particularly in the center part of the city, because the sewer mains in the center part of the city not only take the connection to the building, so the sewage going into the main, it also takes the storm water coming off the street, called combined sewers. All of you who would have heard of combined sewers before. Good group. It was a great design when it was built. This is a tremendous story. I don't get myself sidetracked so easily. But modern sewers were designed after it was discovered by, to me, that one of the greatest stories of courage and science in modern times, which was the guy who figured out that cholera was caused by water pollution in London in the 1850s. I don't off the top of my head remember his name, but I remember the story because I've seen the map he drew. It's also old-fashioned, hand-drawn, but GIS method. Mm-hmm. At the time, the air was so horrible. There's a book called the skeleton map, something like that. I'll think of it by the end of the
map.
Pardon me?
They go map.
Yes, it's a fantastic, fantastic book. Because at the time, I mean, poo was everywhere. If you walk down the street, you had to dodge, and people were throwing things. Just, I literally can't imagine it. The reason high heels were invented was to take people's feet out of the muck. There was muck in basements. There was muck everywhere. And it wasn't just human, it was horses, and it just, good God. And it was so horrifically smelly that the natural inclination is that the reason people die of cholera is because the air is so bad. But this guy took a map, and cholera is incredibly deadly, terrible way to die, killed tens of thousands of people at a time, scourge of the modern world. And he just started, I'm going to go figure this out. That doesn't sound right to me. And I'm going to go, himself, he would start interviewing where were all of the people who were getting cholera. And he put it on a map with a little box that he would fill in for the number of people in any one unit. And what he realized when he did the map is that it didn't match up to air sheds at all. In fact, he could tell it was to a particular water company. And he postulated it was because some of the sewage was getting into the drinking water and that was causing a problem. He was totally attacked at first by the establishment, but he was right. And that led to the creation of a separate sewer system that was built because it saved tens of thousands of lives, and in my opinion, saved the modern urban world. So at the time, taking sewage and rainwater and putting it in one big pipe was a hell of a lot better than the alternative before. In Washington, D.C., there was an open sewer canal that ran along where now Constitution Avenue is, where all the sewage went. Completely open to the air and to everybody else in the city. It's sort of hard to imagine. But these pipes, actually the way they're shaped, I should have drawn it better, looks more like this. The sewage, when it's not rainfall, actually most of it fills in the lip at the bottom. So the vast bulk of the pipe is empty most of the time. And when our workers go in there, they walk along the edges of the sewer to do whatever they got to do. Some of the toughest work in any city that exists are the folks that go down into these pipes. And then when the storm hits and all the stormwater, the whole pipe fills. That's how much quantity pours into these giant underground combined sewers. So how many of you are aware of the flooding at LaJoy Park in Bloomingdale? Some of you? Many of you? Well, what was happening in Bloomingdale, which is a CSO part of the city, is in these big storms, there's actually a whole bunch of pipes that are filling into a particular interceptor we call the Northeast Boundary Sewer Interceptor. It essentially goes on Florida Avenue all the way across the city. At Anacostia, it connects and then goes down south to Blue Plant, which is our big treatment plant. And it's huge. It starts at about 7 feet in diameter, and by the time it makes it to the Anacostia, it is 22 feet in interior diameter. It's a gigantic pipe. But in a big storm, where all that storm water, and by the way, the reason the Northeast Boundary Trunk Sewer is called the Northeast Boundary Trunk Sewer is because when it was built in 1880, Florida Avenue was the northeast boundary of Washington, D.C. There was nothing to the north of Florida Avenue other than farm fields. That's now all developed, creating all this new storm water. All it dumps into the same pipe that was built back then. It's, of course, going to overflow. So it overflows, and so much storm water builds up in the pipe that it actually creates the pressure of a water main, and will start pushing flow out, just like a water main does. And if your basement unit is low enough, where the connection at the unit is lower than the hydrology of what's going in the pipe, it will push right into your basement, and that is what happened. So we had sewer backups all over Bloomingdale because of this incredible, and it's a quantity of snow per hour. It's not the total amount of rain. You could have 20 inches of rain, but as long as it goes in a long period of time, we can get the throughput. It's when it's 4 inches of rain in 1 hour that the pipe can't handle the flow, and it pressurizes, pushes back. It also shoots straight up the top, not blows off the manhole, and shoots straight up into the street and fills the street. So we have flooding on Rhode Island Avenue. So that is the challenge of this old system. So you want to come into the city and build, and I'm not at this point expressing an opinion in favor or against McMillan today. But I'm just using it as an example. Say we all agree that that was a development everybody wanted. It connects to this pipe. So there's the challenge. In any city where you've got this and you want development, not a controversial one. Well, there's yours. We haven't had any development in Trenton in 40 years. Good God, come to us. They would love to have a McMillan development in Trenton if they could get it to go there, but the pipe couldn't handle the flow. That's the question that we have to solve to make sure that urban America can take the kind of growth we'd like to see it happen. And here's what the reason we have never solved this problem, which has been around for a century. This is actually Florida Avenue. This is all the way across. So this is the entire length of Florida Avenue, from actually all the way to LaJoy Park, all the way across the city. This is about 30 feet down. And remember, it's going from 7 feet diameter to 20 feet diameter, slowly getting deeper and deeper so that the flow will go by gravity to the Anacostia. We don't want to have to spend money, nor ratepayer money, pumping it. So everything is working by gravity for these systems. The question was, in order to get to this, it's not just water mains that are up here. We've got Verizon, we've got Pepco, we've got so much other stuff up here, telecommunications lines. And you'd have to dig up the whole thing to get down and do what? Replace a 22-foot diameter sewer with something bigger? It was so costly. And it would be curb to curb, blocking out the road. It would probably take 10 years. The city would drop to a standstill and wouldn't want it. They'd say, no, we'd rather deal with periodic floods than completely rip up Florida. And by the way, that's just one of these. We've got them all over the place. So what are we going to do? So our engineers went to work. And what we are doing, the largest construction project in Washington, D.C. since Metro was built, is 10 stories underground. So this is like these science fiction movies where there's this whole world way, way, way down. This is below everything else. We're below Metro, we're below all the rest. We're building a gigantic tunnel that's 13 miles long. And then all over here, flow that would have have a drop shaft that's going to take the excess all the way down and fill up this giant tunnel, which is going to go all the way across to Anacostia, then all the way down the Anacostia, get the Potomac, take a left on the Potomac, and go all the way down to Blue Plains. 13 miles long. We're currently in this, this is called soft ground tunneling. What the technology that's changed is they have now machines. Although rock tunneling was hard, it's something that structurally we knew how to do. This is not hard ground. This is a deep clay, Potomac clay. So there had to be something called soft ground technology to make this. Goes beyond my legal training, but I had this explained to me. And until they could figure out techniques to do soft ground tunneling, this was not possible. So that's the project we're doing now. In fact, the machine is going now. It is working 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. It tweets all the time. It's at Ladybird. She has her own tweet, and she gives her location and interesting things that she's finding, and she's running along. The machine doing this from end to tail is 1 football field plus a third in length. It's huge. And it's got this kind of, the cutter edge is spinning in the front, and it digs out the stuff which is emulsified to create a pressure so it can push against it. It has, the stuff is emulsified, it's brought back, there's a whole conveyor system that's continuously taking it back all the way to the, ultimately it's a giant shaft down a blue plane going down 10 stories where all of this is coming out. Several thousand trucks a day are doing construction work at blue planes for one reason or another. It's the largest and most expensive project the city has faced since Metro. Most people will never see it, they'll never ride in it. It will make the biggest change to the water quality of the Anacostia. The question, however, is its cost. This project, estimated in 2002 at $2.6 billion. $2.6 billion. This is not any of our capital budget we need to replace the old water mains up here that are 79 years median age. It's none of the water money we need to replace the sewer mains that are even older. It's none of the money we need for the pump stations, the 37,000 valves, the 9,350 fire hydrants, the 4 reservoirs, the 5 above ground tanks, the 4 pump stations we have for sewage, and the largest advanced wastewater treatment plant in the world. None of that money goes to that. It's one of this tunneling system. And that's just one project. I'll give you a sense of the scale of DC Water. Our operating budget for the year that started October 1 is $515 million, 1 year. Our capital budget is $625 million. So it's a $1.1 billion spend for 1 year, and it's your money. Anything I brag about that DC Water is doing, you all are enabling, because that's where the money comes from. There is no federal money. Back in the old days, when this first came out, there was a construction grants program providing about 75% of the cost of upgrades to plants, no more. Maybe 5% of our capital program gets federal funding, maybe 5%. 95% is ratepayers, and we serve a very large area, but the largest share of it is paid for by DC ratepayers. If some consider it unfair, the challenge is that there are no combined sewer pipes in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Fairfax, Loudoun, or Arlington. It's only in the city. So a decision was made before my time that since it's only a city problem, only city ratepayers, for the most part, actually, municipal ratepayers are paying 7% of this on average, because we can show that 7% of the rainwater that's going to go in here actually originates from rainfall that falls in the suburbs and flows into the district. But that means 93% of this is being paid for by district ratepayers. So now we have a financial challenge. Engineering was hard enough. But my engineers always tell me we can build anything and solve any problem as long as we have enough money. Money's always the challenge. And the challenge on finance is that almost nobody's used to paying for this particular service. For the very longest time, and this is a transformation that we're working at very hard at DC Water. I was very fortunate recently to get an award as a business leader from the Chamber of Commerce. I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back, because every time something like that happens, the next day there's terrible water main breaks, and I have all these people calling in. It reminds me of not to get a big head. It's impossible in a job like this. But the reason we consider it important is that anybody even thought of us as a business, because that is what we want. The challenge was that the DC Water and Sewer Authority, or DC WASA, which those of you who are veterans of the city would call us, was not known for customer service. Most of our customers paid the same amount every month. For a very long time, they were all occupants, because we didn't know what their names were in residences or homes. It was a backwards organization, and not unlike any of the rest of the country. This was not because we were worse than everybody else. That's sort of the standard. Run by great engineers and technical people. And I love these folks. I have tons of them who work for me. I love watching them think and fix things and solve problems for all of us. an amazing thing to see. But that's not the same kind of person that has business strategy, marketing strategy. How do we talk to our customer base? How do we communicate these things? How do we make sure our lower income folks are being served well? That's a different kind of question than most of our operators are thinking about. They want to know how to build this thing. And that's hard enough, for God's sake. It's not like we didn't have something to do. So when the board hired me, I had never worked for a utility before. I'd only sued them. or agitated about them, or regulated them. It was a very unusual choice. But their view was, and I credit my predecessor, Jerry Johnson, for this, he actually built a very strong operations senior team. They didn't need someone to come in and tell them how to run Blue Plains. I've got Walt Bailey, the best senior manager for our wastewater plant in the world, works for us. I've got a great chief engineer. I got all these people running this stuff. What they wanted is a new relationship of a public utility to the people we serve. And the bottom line was cost. Most of the changes we've made have been in relationships, and in media, and in external affairs. But the bottom line is cost. Comes some of the innovative financing techniques we're using. But the primary one is always going to be the same, which is ratepayer cost. On any water sewer bill, you're going to have a volumetric component. This is, by the way, same for power. So when you're smart power or decoupling or issues with Pepco, it's the same issue. A certain amount of your bill you pay, usually it's per gallon. For us, it's per 100 gallons, CCF. You pay a per unit cost for water and sewer. And that is volumetric. So the more you use, the more you pay. Then we have a series of parts of the bill which we are decoupled from volume use, which in our case we have a metering charge that you pay a fixed fee. We're the first city, done before my time, I brag about it, had nothing to do with it, to put in automatic meter reading in the United States with Washington, D.C. This pays for all of the technology that allows you to go online as a customer and see your water use. And we notify you if there's something amiss, that's paid for by your metering fee. The biggest one is called our impervious area charge, IAC, or Clean Rivers. This charge exclusively pays the capital cost of this project. And the impervious area charge is IAC, that's what it stands for, impervious area charge. It's not based on volume. It's based on how much impervious cover is on your lot. So if you've got a lot and you've got the whole thing, concrete and roofs and all the rest, that generates a certain amount of stormwater based on calculations, which is of course going into the pipe, which is causing the project. So there was a reason to connect impervious area to the cost of the project. Otherwise, it just would have been built into the sewer part of the bill. Everyone would have paid for it, but it would have been hidden in a volumetric charge. It didn't have as much a relationship to the cost of the project. So there's the impervious area charge, there's our metering charge, and then there's a bunch of charges on there that we collect for the city. We collect a stormwater charge for something called MS4. I won't go into huge discussion about that, but in the non-CSO parts of the city, the center of the city is all CSO, meaning this combined. The newer parts of the city around the edges is called MS4. And the S4 is separate storm sewer system. M is municipal. So the sewer pipe on MS4 street is completely separate from the stormwater pipe. That's why it's called the separate storm sewer system. Advantages to that system, obviously, no CSOs. All of the pipes in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Fairfax, Loudon, and all the rest are MS4. The disadvantage, by the way, there are disadvantages to MS4. When the flow that's coming off the street goes into the MS4 pipe, you know where it goes? Right to the nearest stream. There is no treatment plant. That pipe just connects ultimately to a discharge point on the stream. And so whatever is on that street, there's usually rudimentary, there's a weir, so the big heavy stuff will get caught before it goes into the rest of the pipe. Sometimes there's some basic treatment, but it's not a treatment facility like Blue Plains. So all the pollutants that are coming into the MS4 system will go right out to the stream and not ever get to the sewer. So you don't have CSOs, but you do have flow coming from the MS4 system right to your rivers. And we have that in the city too. So we're collecting money on this bill down here. It's actually also based on impervious area charge for the city to run the MS4 program. DC Water does not run that. That's run by my old agency, Department of Environment. So the first thing we've had to do is update our whole billing system. And it's a challenge, and the reason we spend so much time on external affairs. I personally believe that the money you pay for water and sewer is the best bargain you get in any city, anywhere you go. The scale of all this is so vast, it's so complex, and we usually pay less than, well, the average single-family bill in Washington, D.C. is about $85. That's a lot, but it's nothing compared to a cable bill, a cell phone bill, power bill, and they don't have any of this stuff. In order to repair our stuff, it's not above the ground. We got to dig down in the street. Every project, everything that we do is a big project, because it's hard to have a small problem with a system like this. So it's an incredibly low cost for something that is so fundamentally essential to every life. But we've been good enough at it that most people don't know where the water comes from when they turn it on, or what a gift it is. You visit anywhere else in the world, you realize what a gift it is to have clean water at the tap every minute of the day. You walk up, get that sink, it's there. And it's tested thousands of times before it gets to you to make sure it's clean. In countries that they don't have it, it's mostly women, but the amount of time that people spend just getting water for daily needs is unbelievably, it's terrible for the lifestyle of those folks. And we deliver it every minute of every day. And then once it goes down the drain, poof, it disappears. No matter what you put in it. You pour that paint down the thing, we'll be mad at you, but we take that too. Whatever comes of anything, the dead animals on the street, everything else that comes to us, we clean it at the most advanced wastewater treatment plant in the world before it goes back to the Potomac, which, by the way, is where it came from. Drinking water comes off the Potomac at Great Falls, comes to Dale Carlier, where it gets most of its treatment, comes to us, we distribute it to you, you use it, goes down the drain, comes back to us, we clean it again in Blue Plains, and it goes back to the Potomac. It's the original and largest recycling program in any city in which we exist. And you get that 24 hours a day, life-giving, job-creating, and economic vitality for $85 a month. That's a bargain, in my opinion. But it isn't a bargain if you're used to paying $25 a month. And that's the challenge we've had, is our customers are not used to capital costs. When you put in a pipe, it does in fact last for 60 or 70 years. It's not a moving part down here, most of it. So it sits down there, you put it in most cities built around the same time, turn of the last century, 1910, 1920, 1930, the cities are building, that's when all this stuff was going in. And then for a very long time, it just worked. So if you were paying money out to our predecessor agency, you weren't paying money to build things like this, or to replace the sewer, which we do on the insides, because we can't get to the street, we line them on the inside, or the water mains, which we do replace by tearing out the whole street, replacing all the laterals, or rebuilding Blue Plains, or rebuilding a pump station, because it was all newish. So now not only are you facing projects like this at $2.6 billion, but a capital cost of a system that was put in 80 years ago that we haven't been paying for. So our customer base is used to paying an operating expense and none of these capital costs. So it's a total sticker shock. You pay $200 a month for cable, that doesn't seem so crazy. Yet you pay $80 for this, it's hard, but that's because you sort of always had to pay a lot for cable. You didn't always have to pay a lot for water and sewer. So I have 13 full-time people communicating with you all about what we do. It's not just we communicate about whatever project. We're not perfect at this. We can always get better, but where we're going to work, how to get up notices, how to talk to neighbors, going to ANC meetings, going to local meetings. We do everything we can on that front. We have materials that we put out. We have a very active social media presence on Twitter and all the rest. Because we do tours, we go into schools, we have a big program with kids. We need our customers to know what it is we do. Because in the 5 years I've been at DC Water, we have increased the average single-family bill from $42 a month to $85. So it's doubled. And we have projected increases as far as we can see in the future. When I started at DC Water, the capital replacement ratio of of these assets, we have 1,300 miles of water mains. That's from here to St. Louis. We have 1,800 miles of sewer mains. That's from here to St. Louis and halfway back. I said 37,000 valves, all that stuff. We were replacing 0.3%, 3% a year of that capital. No, I'm sorry, 0.3% a year. A 300-year replacement cycle. On top of a median age of 79 years. It was catastrophic. That was not just going to fail, that has been failing. That's why water main breaks. So in the years I've been there, we have increased that to 1% a year. Tripled it. Took us 5 years. Get to build up to it, get more staff, get more equipment to do all the work. 1% is a 100-year replacement cycle. Probably not good enough, but it's probably all of our customers can afford. The national average in the United States is 0.5%. 200-year replacement cycle. So this is a real problem nationwide. There are a lot of other creative things you can do, however. This was the coolest thing that we just did this summer. Putting in this big tunnel, and I do all of our public meetings myself on the bills. It's not my favorite part of the job, because some of those meetings are tough, and I know why. And I'm sympathetic to ratepayers who have a hard time paying our bills. That doesn't mean I like standing in front of people and being yelled at. I'm not sure anybody likes that, although I've done a lot of it. But I do all these rate meetings myself, and I try to explain why I hope to persuade a customer that this is a good, solid investment in the future of the city for them and their children and their children's children. And the questions I kept on getting is, well, the tunnel you're building, the $2.6 billion thing, isn't that solving this problem that was built in 1880? I'm like, yeah, you got it. Good job. That worked. And he says, and how long do you think this tunnel is going to last? And I said, oh, God, as long as we can see in the future. This wasn't all in one question, but it came out over a series of questions and meetings. Is, well, how come a small group of ratepayers is paying off the price of this thing if it's solving a 100-year problem in the past and is a 100-year solution in the future, but only a small group of ratepayers is going to pay the freight? Why should a small group of ratepayers pay the cost of a project that's solving a centuries-old problem and putting a solution in place that will be in place for about as long or longer? I'm like, that's a fair question. Just because you happen to be born now doesn't mean you should be saddled with the cost of a systems fix for everyone for a long time in the future. Typically, what a municipality does to finance projects like this is debt financing, tax